We are back for vlog 298 at Peppermill Reno, and I kind of still on tilt. My last session that I played, that obviously was not vlogged, I managed to make 3 very large flushes on the day. One on the flop, one on the turn, one on the river. And on all 3 rivers, I ran into full houses, booking an $1,800 loss. So, we are officially in the red for 2025, as much as I hate to admit that. But the game here today looks pretty good. Let's begin the process of digging out. Vlog 298 would come your way from Peppermill Reno, a place that you can now access via scooter should you desire to, a place where law enforcement has a dedicated parking spot,
and a place where the kitty comes out to play. Do you want to join?
I'd get it in the room at around 10 a.m. It was one of those days where it was unclear when the game would start, but I wanted to make sure to get a seat regardless of what that time was, so I would have a bit of a wait. So with that in mind, I would channel my inner OMC while listening to the Crush Live Poker Podcast, which now comes out on Thursday nights, so Friday morning is usually the optimal time for me to listen to it. And very good stuff as always from Bart Hansen on that podcast. If you want to get 25% off for life on a subscription to CLP, you can just use the link in the description below. The lineup was very intriguing out of the gate, featuring Slick and the legendary Mr. W. You also had other favorites, like my boy Bugsy, Bombpot Blue, and a man who was a slightly better soccer player than me. Somehow after this brutal past week, I had a total of 452 random chips in my cart. So I'd bring them into the game and put them in play, buying in for the rarely seen $1,452 amount. Probably the first time in poker history anyone has ever bought in for that exact figure. I'd give Slick and Mr. W action on 2 hands early on and would lose about $200 in the process there. But the first hand worth mentioning comes just after 11 o'clock. An unknown player in middle position 2 straddles more than he needs to, putting in 20 on the rock, with Mr. W and Slick limping in. I have ace-king, middle position 1, and make it 4x, thinking that the guy in the rock would not give action. Not sure why I would think that, as he does call. And once that happens, you know that Slick and Mr. W are going to be calling as well. So with 320 in, the flop would come out 10-7 deuce rainbow, and no one bets. The turn is a king, and it gets checked to me. I bet 125. Middle position 2, that unknown out-of-towner in the rock, makes the call with Slick and Mr. W going out. So with 470 in, the river is an 8. Not knowing how light he's capable of calling, and not knowing how often he's going to be slow playing, I bet an amount hoping that, quite honestly, most of his range here would pay off. I would put in 175, thinking that hands like pocket 9s would consider looking me up for that amount. And sure enough, he does. Put in the chips, creating an $820 pot. I show my hand, and he mucks. The very next hand, I am in the rock under the gun 1. MP1 calls, and MP2, who is a very tough player, raises to 50. Big blind calls, and I have Jack 10 suited, and put in the additional $40. The limper also calls, and with 200 in, the flop would come out King Jack 10 2 hearts, giving me 2 pair. I go for the check raise here. Original raiser bets out for 80, and it folds back to me. I give this some thought before ultimately making it 225. The problem with this play is that this is an opponent good enough to fold ace-king here, believe it or not. And he's not giving me much action at all. I'm not giving him much action at all. So it's possible that being deceptive here could have been the better play, but there's a lot of landmines I would have to step over in a spot like this on a flop like that, so I like the check raise here. He gives it some thought, and ultimately throws his hand into the muck. We get a limp from Mr. W, and from Slick, I have Queen Jack of Diamonds on the button and take the aggressive route, squeezing it to 125. Mr. W takes a long time and mucks what he later would claim to be ace-queen. And Slick folds face up, leaving no mystery, showing 5-6 offsuit. This is a mid-session update. I am not a big drinker, probably average 1 drink per week, but For the first time in my life, I have tried Michelob Ultra. There are two people in this world that love Michelob Ultra more than anything. One of them is Taylor Sheridan, because if you've watched Landman, he's basically telling you you can be an alcoholic and still get away with drinking it because it is the best beer that exists on the face of the earth. I'm not sure anyone has ever worked in more plugs for a product in one show than he did. And by the way, hell of a policy his daughter has in that show. The other person that loves Michelob Ultra more than anything else is Rena here at the Poker Room. And I am here to say that my review of this beer is that it is the epitome of an average beer. Not above, not below, average. We didn't get a hand where you can definitely take something away from, because I'm guessing this is relevant in most 2-5 and 5-10 games across the country. I pick up 6-7 of hearts and open to 30 under the gun, plus 1 calls and Mr. W calls in the cutoff. So with 100 in, we're 3 ways to the flop, coming out 6-5 deuce, rainbow with 1 heart, giving me top pair, and I bet 60. First player folds, and Mr. W, sticky as he can be, makes the call. So with 220 in, the turn is the jack of spades. Can I continue to get called by worse here? I actually did think that a lot of the time the answer to that question is yes. But I also want protection against the ace-high types hands that he's just kind of floating along on the flop with, because he's proven he's capable of doing that. So I bet 85. And he starts muttering some words that I can't fully hear, but he's a guy who constantly talks, so it's not something that's rare. But it sounded something like, well, now I can't fold. As if, like, the turn got him in trouble, or something. And I didn't know what that meant, but I will say I definitely didn't think that it meant the thing that it ultimately ended up meaning. So with 390 in, the river is the queen of clubs, and I check. I'm expecting him to check back all of his 1-pair hands here, unless he somehow has a weird hand with 2 spades in it that ran into a big queen on the river, which didn't seem all that likely. He bets $200 though, basically a half-pot size bet, and to me it just has to be 2-pair or better unless it's what I was just saying, and I really think that he raises earlier if he had those holding. So given that, and given how loose and how aggressive of an opponent we're talking about here, I just think he's going to have a lot of bluffs. So I call, creating a $790 pot, and he shows pocket fives for a flopped set. It would go down as a hand involving me, forgetting an important rule that in games like this is always applicable. Slow playing is much more common than bluffing. And in this case, it included a little Hollywooding, little acting with it. Something that I'm personally not a fan of, but I don't have a problem, obviously, with people doing it. I understand it's part of the game. I'm trying to put on a show, trying to really make it look like you don't have what you end up having. Combine that with the history I have with this opponent, and I gotta say, it took me by surprise. But at the end of the day, it was my mistake. I shouldn't have played the hand in the first place, and I ended up getting involved in a spot that was terrible against a guy who had the exact flop he wanted to get, and I would dust off a lot of money that I could have saved if I had just listened to Morpheus. And if that wasn't enough, I would then give 200 to Slick 3 hands later when he'd make a flush against my pocket kings, and I would make an agonizing river fold. We would then get carnage in a bomb pot, straight over set on one board, and a pair of 3s taking the other. I'd lose $125 calling a flop bet with jacks on the top board, but threw them away prior to turning trips, as all the money ended up going in on the flops. Slick straddles to 15, middle position 1. I have ace, king of spades, and the low jack can make it 45. Folds back to him, and he makes the call. So at 95 in, the flop is ace, 8-9 with 2 clubs, and he checks. I bet half the size of the pot here, and he makes a move at his cards, finally doubles back, and calls. It really seemed like he was ready to fold there. And with 195 in, the turn is the 6 of clubs. He checks, and I'm just going to be good here way too often. That checking would be way too nitty. Have to go for value, so I bet 100. And once again, he hems and haws. Thinks about it for another 10 seconds. Finally calls. So with 395 in, the river is a disaster. So now I'm hoping he checks. And instead, he fires big. I fold the hand and he starts saying something about how I make more good river folds against him than anyone else, which I really hope wasn't him just kind of adding on a second bluff after the first one. But I guess we'll never know. The next 2 hours were completely miserable. Flopping top pair type hands constantly, with them never remaining good by the river. Several flush draws, several straight draws, all missing, and it would just result in a lot of small pots being lost, and it was pretty damn disgusting. I am on massive tilt, but unlike last week, this time the game is actually good. So I will not be leaving. I will be doing the one thing I know can reduce my level of tilt right now. Gotta buy a shrimp burrito. Despite the shrimp burrito, things wouldn't turn my way at all, as I was down around 1,000 in this game at this point. Slick would come back from smoking so much tree with Reno Grinder that he was so high that he almost mucked his cards on the river in a bomb pot, and when he finally turned them over, much to the dismay of Bugsy, he would turn over straights on both freaking boards and scoop the entire pot. I don't think I've ever seen someone this close to mucking that would end up taking both boards down. Slick is a true beast. And he would stay hot after that, as he'd fire a hockey puck into the next bomb pot and get action from 2 guys and chop the money from one of them. I was probably down about 1,200 at this point, as things just were miserable, despite the game not being bad. Slick opens, and yes, this is an open, to $110 under the gun 1. I have Queen Jack of Diamonds, middle position 2, and if I'm going to give anyone action, it's going to be him. Everyone else folds, and with 225 in, he then bets $200 in the dark, which I gotta say is a play you rarely see in this game. I have thoughts on it, but I won't get into them. The board comes out Jack 4-5 with 1 diamond. I am not folding this hand. So with 425 in, the turn pairs the 3. Pretty good card for me still to be good. He checks, thinking I can get a river bet out of him. I just check this back, and that card is a black deuce. He grabs some chips, but fewer than I would certainly expect, tossing in 125, and I snap call, creating a $675 pot, and he simply says, no pair. So I just table my hand. He ends up showing ace-queen, and I would take that pot down. I was then in the rock, and I know this is a shock, but I looked down at 8-deuce. So it was nice to win that one, but not nearly as nice as it was for Mr. Nameoff, winning this massive bomb pot with the nut flush on one board and trip aces on the other. 3 other guys would bail, and Slick went to dinner. And he said he was going to be gone an hour. When he says an hour, it usually means 2.5. So the game would be 4-handed for about 45 minutes, and then several guys got fed up with that and just left. So the game would simply break, with Slick's stack in seat 5 being all by itself, as he was still yet to come back from dinner. I had gotten into one hand prior to that happening, but I was so disgusted with the whole thing that I stopped rolling video, in which there's one player who I like to call the Exxon Valdez, because she is a massive tanker. There was a hand against her where I tried to semi-bluff a double gut shot straight draw and wanted to throw up all over the table when she 3-bet the turn to 700. And I had to fold, and she would show, of course, what was the nut straight at the time. But it was one of those things where you all know that feeling. The feeling of, I rarely play this draw super aggressive. What are the chances I'm going to be up against the nuts when I do? It's the worst feeling ever, knowing that you could have called and won a massive pot should you have improved your hand. But, like I said, I didn't get that one on video, but it was the last hand I would play on the day, as an 8-hour session would come to an end, and I would rack up and book the loss. All right, wrapping up an 8-hour session here at Peppermill. $912 more in the hole than I was going into it. Wow, just kind of in a state of shock right now in terms of how things are going. I cannot blame the game quality this time like I did a week ago. The game was good. I had chances. I totally fucked up that hand against Mr. W in seemingly every way, and obviously never recovered, and found myself just incredibly pissed off at myself after that hand that I just kind of briefly told you about there at the end, when I decided to semi-bluff a double gut shot straight draw and ended up being up against the nuts when it happened. So, can I say, poker, it's a grind. All right, so not the greatest of times poker-wise, but, you know, that's okay. Life's still good otherwise. My son, who's now 5 years old, who I only have Monday through Thursday, as much as I wish I could have him with me every single day. When I drop him off now on Thursdays, he always makes a point to say, "Bye, Daddy, I'll miss you." And, you know, obviously that's one of those things that just, you know, feels great to hear. And obviously I miss him as well every time I'm not around. But let's do something we haven't done in a minute on this vlog, and that is give something away. The previous and present administrations, if you will, of the Peppermill Poker Room, Mike Nelson being the first, now Kathy Wood, both have been generous enough to give me these limited edition coins that they put out. 99.9% pure silver, as you can see. And since I already have one of them, I don't need the other one, and I want to give it to one of you. And those of you that have been with the channel know what method I'm going to use to do that. Over the next month, the best question or comment that comes in that allows me to respond to it, expand upon it, or whatever, is going to be the winner of this particular contest. So it's a free roll. The only thing I ask, I want the winner to be following me on Instagram at bendeach, and of course, subscribed to this channel. If you live internationally, you will have to cover the cost of shipping. We'll figure that out afterwards. But if you live in the States, I'll just send it to you. We'll email after the fact, and we'll make that happen. So let's get some good content in here, and we'll do that over the course of the next month. And certainly we got a lot of work to do poker-wise over the course of that month, because the start to 2025 has been extremely below average.
I've got an itch I can't scratch, I'm missing a piece that completes a whole part of me, an open wound scar to see. Everybody come here, gather round, welcome to the freak show, the best in town. What the hell's wrong with me? I don't get along with anybody, honestly. I've been living in my own head constantly, thoughts jumbled around, think I need a new lobotomy. Wait, all these thoughts are too negative. I don't wanna get lost in the sedative. Gotta show them what I got, I'm competitive. You know I'm about to go off, I won't let them win, I'll take a stab. I wanna chase a bag, I wanna weigh, I can change all the things I lack. I gotta face the facts, I got a taste in that. Got me obsessed with the rest, I got an itch to scratch. No way.